Welcome to Evolve Through God. My name is Angela Goodman, and I am your host of this podcast. And today I have a special guest interviewer, Matthew Berthot. So I asked Matt to come on today to kind of interview me with my story because it's a lot easier for me to answer questions than it is for me to just stand here and talk, as we witnessed during episode number 1. So I asked Matt to do this for me today. So we're going to do a really short episode kind of about my backstory. I alluded to that during episode 1. So I'm going to give it to Matt.
All right. Thank you for this takeover of your
already
second episode.
Yeah.
Well, I have got to spend a lot of time with Angela in the last almost year and a half now. Mm-hmm. And she's grown a ton in her faith and spirituality and her love of God and Jesus. And, so I would ask her questions based on her faith journey. And so the first question I have is, how old were you when you started thinking about, is there God, or what is God?
I can't pinpoint an actual age, honestly. I always knew that God existed somehow. I don't remember having a light bulb moment. I can remember when I was about 7 or 8, the one memory that I have of church or ever being in a church, my parents had me in the Christmas pageant at St. Luke's Baptist in Grafton, Virginia.
Baptist.
And yes. And I remember, it wasn't a church we went to. I think I alluded to that in the first episode. I never went to church as a kid, and we didn't go to church. But I can remember being a shepherd, I believe. I had like a purple t-shirt on. I had this like band around my head, and I stood up front where they were playing the nativity, and I didn't understand it. I had no idea what it was about. I just knew I was in church. My mom had me doing it, and I was about 7 or 8 at that time. Yeah.
So when did the curiosity start?
It was a lot later, actually. I can remember my parents got divorced when I was 8, and I can remember during that time being very emotionally upset, not about the divorce, but they used to fight a lot. And so I remember a lot of heated arguments between the two of them and kind of just wishing that they would not do that. And so the thought never occurred to me, even though I knew there was God, the thought never occurred to me to like pray to God or pray or any of that. I just kind of wished that they would, not fight anymore. And they ended up getting divorced. And I can remember in that process when my mom and my sister and I moved out and they sold the house, my sister had a Bible, a little small white one, which is actually ironically the Bible that I read to this day. It was given to her by my dad. It's actually a Masonic Bible.
That's cool.
Yeah. And I can remember being given it. I can remember opening it like in my teenage years, thinking nothing of it, putting it away and sticking it on a bookshelf. So it was a lot later. I was really in my mid 30s to late 30s before I really questioned any of that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Like before basketball games or like anything, did you pray?
So I had people in my life who would pray around me, and I just never really connected to it. I know that makes very little sense.
Well, I mean,
but
big brain.
Yeah.
Like it has to make sense to you.
Yeah.
Like the engineer part of you. It's,
Yeah.
God's very in the middle gray.
Yeah. Yeah. I think to your point, I have a very scientific and analytic brain. And so I was always looking for proof, give me proof, give me some type of something that I could tangibly touch or visibly see or any of that to actually believe in to a strong degree or have curiosity about. And yes, I played sports and sure I can remember, and actually until you brought that up, like I didn't even think about that part of it. I can remember coaches over time. I played basketball. I played softball. I can remember coaches over time who would say a quick prayer before a game, but I just never absorbed it.
What about like funerals and weddings? Like,
I can remember when my grandfather on my mom's side passed in 96, and I was actually on my way to, this is probably the moment that maybe was kind of started me sort of in the direction. He passed, I was on a plane flying to Italy for a high school trip for 2 weeks. And he passed while I was flying. And I didn't get a chance to see him. And my grandfather and I, when I was little, were close. And I didn't get a chance to see him before he died. And when we landed in Italy, we landed actually in Milan. And our first stop was Florence. And I can remember going to the Duomo, and the first thing I wanted to do was light a candle for him. And so I lit a candle for him in the Duomo, which is one of the oldest cathedrals in Italy, in Florence. And like I think I can think back now, and I remember having that sort of like rush, you know, that feeling of connection to spirit. But I had no idea what that, you know, like I just didn't, there was no curiosity, no thought, no deep anything about it. It was just like I felt compelled to go light a candle in his memory inside this cathedral. He was Catholic and Spanish. And yeah, so that's actually probably like my first real recollection of that, was that trip to Italy when we went into several cathedrals, you know, in all the various cities. We went to the Vatican too. So yeah.
So, you know, not being in the church, not growing up in the church, not knowing a lot of the history of the church or knowledge of the Bible until, you know, really recent. How did you feel about people that did? Like, were believers?
Oh boy, I was really skeptic.
Yeah,
I was very skeptical of, you know, I had met people in my life who attended church on a regular basis, and then were also some of the most judgmental, angry people I'd ever met.
Yeah.
And so I have a very kind nature, and I totally repelled that, right? And so then everyone I met who went to church or believed in God or was, you know, talked of Jesus often, like, to me, I was like, oh, that's fake. Like, they're just, you know, I really questioned people who were very vocal about their faith at that time in my life. Yeah.
So now the walk has changed.
Yeah.
You went through a lot of pain, a lot of struggle in the last 6 years. And, you know, you almost died a couple times.
Yep, I have.
And, you know, the first time when you had Avery, was there any God moments in that birth?
You know, so stepping foot in the Vatican and being in Italy was the first kind of like connection to all of that, right? For me, that I can really remember. I was at that time 16 or 17. I don't really have much recollection after that point. You know, on my travels, I've routinely been drawn to go into cathedrals, right? You and I have done that together too. And so I did that through some of my travels, but never really connected to God in that way. And then I was 32 when I was pregnant with Avery. I gave birth to her and found out when I couldn't walk about 4 days later that I had a blood clot in my ovarian vein, which is a very rare condition, but it had cut off circulation in half of my body. And I had an infection from my thighs to my midsection that pretty much was taking out all my organs. And so I spent a week in the hospital on pretty heavy IV antibiotics and blood thinners and all of that for the clot to go away. And I can remember when I found out that I had it, the doctor that I had at the time actually came down to the car to tell me, because she didn't want me to walk because she was afraid that it could rupture or move and kill me. And she actually came down to the car with my admitting paperwork for the hospital. And so when my husband at the time drove me over to the hospital, they had a wheelchair waiting to take me inside so that I moved as little as possible. And I can remember the nurse pushing me through the hallway of the hospital. And it was like that feeling of everything kind of closing in on you.
Oh, boy.
And I can remember thinking to myself, this isn't it. Like, I'm going to see that door again. I'm going to go back outside again. Like, this isn't it. But wheeling me down that hallway was a very, like, surreal moment where I remember, like, I can close my eyes and be in that moment in an instant. And I think that was the first time that I chose to live. Right? We all get opportunities and choices to live when we have those moments in our life. And I chose to see the other side of my life. And it was a struggle. I mean, it was a couple of months coming out of that. And at that time, my faith, I really didn't have much, and I didn't know to pray. And I didn't have a relationship with God that I knew of at that time. You know, he's always there for us. I know that now. And I can look back on moments that happened with that I know he was with me, but I didn't know it at the time. And so, you know, when I came out, I knew I was going to continue to live, but I still didn't go there. I still didn't go to find a relationship with him at that point.
Why?
I don't know.
Yeah, you do.
I fell into a pretty deep depression. It was a pretty dark place. Here I was, 4 days after having a newborn. It's my second child. I couldn't take care of her. I couldn't walk. I couldn't, I couldn't feed myself. I was bedridden for, 2 months, 2.5 months, pretty much. In pretty severe pain for most of that also. So I went into a really dark place. And instead of knowing to find God and to look for God and to have a relationship with God, I just stayed in that dark place and didn't leave it.
So you obviously lived, and your child grew up.
She is, yeah.
And, for the last 5 years, you joined Arte Syndicate. Mm-hmm. You met some incredible people that introduced you to a deeper faith, to the deeper aspects of spirituality.
Yeah, I did have a couple of people along the way. So after I had Avery, I moved. I ended up taking a new role at the career that I had about 6 months later, and I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. And when I moved to Charlotte, I picked up trying to get my body health physically back. I had just talked about I had been an athlete, right? And so after having the clot, not being able to walk, having a baby, I was fairly out of shape, and I decided to kind of take control of my health back in 2011, a year later. And while I was playing tennis, I met a friend of mine, Carmen. And Carmen's originally from Puerto Rico, and she has very strong faith. And she would talk about going to church and God and Jesus, and she would talk about all of those things. And so she actually is really the one, I would say, who kind of cracked the door for me, because it was somebody finally in my life who was consistent about their relationship with God, that was non-judgmental, that served people in the way that I believe God wants us to serve people. And so she was kind of my first little window in 2011. I didn't cling to it. It would just be conversations that would be had here and there, and I didn't cling to it. I still didn't work on a relationship with God, but she was kind of my first real crack in the door. So, yeah. But I actually want to stop there. And then I want to talk about what you asked about Arte and the people that I've met there and what that impact has been for me and kind of the walk since meeting Carmen and all of that. And we're going to do that in the next short episode.
Oh.
Yeah.
Part 2.
We're going to do a part 2. We're just doing short, sweet episodes for these little parts with me. And then by the time we get to our interviews, we will have a little bit longer episode clips. They'll be about half an hour to 45 minutes. But with some amazing guests. And I do believe I will be interviewing you at some point.
Okay.
Yeah. So thank you all for listening today to Evolve Through God. I am so excited to get this going. I'm excited to have some amazing guests, talk about God a lot and Jesus, and hope you all had a great holiday season. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Angela.